You know how we've talked about the purpose of Genesis 1 to 2 verse 4a, the creation myth or creation account is
Yep.
really just correcting the record of other mythologies?
Right. Yes, it's polemic.
Correct. So we've talked about how out of chaos came order from other mythologies. Well, Christianity is a bit of a clearly, again, correcting the record, a complete turnaround from that. But when I was reading this
Well,
textbook,
let me say something like
sure.
the polemic structure in Genesis 1 to 11 is interesting. Like from 2 to 11 at least, you can clearly see this polemic going on where he's correcting the record. As for this initial creation account, I think it is also polemic in nature, but what I think it is originally was a psalm the Hebrews sang in the wilderness. And I don't think it was necessarily Mosaic. I think they already sang this. And it's attributing the various features of the creation to the Most High alone creating. And it's debunking that they are deities of themselves. And it seems to be like it's based on knowledge that the other peoples had their creation myths. And there could have even been a creation myth that had the seven moving deities in the sky, which are, let's see, the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They're all given a day of the week, and I imagine the pagans had these different deities perhaps creating on their day or something like this. I think an idea like that is being overturned in this. And the Hebrews are saying, no, it was a 7-day refurbishing of this place, creating life and beautifying it. And the reason it was 7 days was because on the seventh day is God's Sabbath rest. And so it was establishing the Sabbath day. And it's all polemical. But this first creation account, I think, has its own character about it. It's a little different than the Edenic narrative that comes after it. You know, there's just a slight difference.
There is. Yes, there is. And I think when I was looking into, and I read this in this textbook, it's just a thought I'm having, how more or less the creation myth in the Bible is different from other mythologies. Another difference I noticed too was in a lot of other mythologies, I'll read it here from the textbook. Humanity was more or less a means for the gods to avoid physical labor, but in Genesis 1, humankind is the jewel in this literary royal crown, the climax of God's creative activity. And I thought that was interesting how another way scripture is different from other mythologies, where other mythologies really saw the human as insignificant, as just labor for the gods. It
Yeah.
kind of flips things where humankind is actually held at such a high regard that humankind will be made in our image after our likeness.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Let me show you something. Man was created to honor the gods and worship. Man was made to work for the cults of the gods. Yeah, the Hebrew has God creating man in his image to reign over the earth, whereas the other creation myths tend to have the gods creating man as to serve the gods and to feed the gods and things like this. In fact, when they destroy man in the flood, I think the gods get upset because they're hungry, they need to eat. So there's some weird things like servanthood. Man was created as a servant to help the gods. And that's just not in the Hebrew record at all. That's not communicated at all. And that's polemic. When something isn't communicated in the Hebrew, when it's left out, that can be as polemic as anything. Like here, mankind is in the image of God because he rules over the rest of creation. It's not because man looks like the gods. That's not why. But you will find that idea in the pagan myths. That idea is not stated in the Hebrew account. And that's polemic of its own. A polemic from silence. Anyway, so I kind of described how it's all polemic, but I see this first section a little differently from the rest, and then Moses incorporated it, and there's some redaction that's occurred. I'm just guessing something like that is what happened here, though. And but it is polemic, and yet the reason God creates man is a high view. Basically, there's just a high view of things here, unlike some of the pagan myths. And most Bible commentaries, when they start through this, they'll just take it as historical narrative and this is just what happened in history, and this is the first week, and then it's assumed that Adam and Eve are here. And that simple historical narrative view of this causes a lot of problems, and it's just not the right way of looking at this style of material, what it's about and what it's trying to say. And something else is that the ultimate origin of things isn't mentioned here. This is God beautifying things after a divine judgment. That's the tone of this portion, and it's cyclical, but it comes to an end here because God declares everything good. And this is all in the notes from the rabbis down through here. But it doesn't rule out the scientific view of origins. That's just not in view. The way the Hebrew record is structured, it really has to do with God. It's an ongoing work here, and God creates new creatures and so forth. But it's not like an ultimate origins story. And like this opening line, it's important to know that there's not an ex nihilo pronouncement at the beginning of this, and so forth. So there's a lot involved, but there's a cyclical issue here, and it comes to an end with the creation of man. And so that's really how the rabbis saw it. To say it deals with ultimate beginnings, I don't think you can really say that. And
interesting.
Yeah.
Even the gap theory has an ex nihilo statement at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then they have a gap of time with a chaos. Now the earth had become formless and void. That's not really how it reads. It's saying when God began to create the heavens and the earth, this is not an ultimate beginning point. There were worlds before this. The rabbis talk about it. In fact, this psalm parallels the flood story. If you want a commentary on what this looked like as it occurred, the best place to look is the flood story. And you can see that in the two floods, these notes here, connect this initial creation account with the flood story. And the rabbis knew there was a world before Noah's flood and there was a world after Noah's flood. And they said, well, the same thing is true here. There was a world before this, and then God creates afresh here. So they saw a cycles going on. That comes out in Rabbi Tanhuma. The world was created when it was due, and the world was not fit to be created earlier. Rabbi Abahu said, hence we learn that the Holy One, blessed be He, went on creating worlds and destroying them until He created these, heaven and earth. And then He said, these please me, those did not please me. And the reasoning is provided by Friedman here. And what's real crucial is this Toledot at the close of this initial creation account and the commencement of the second creation account. This Toledot's real important in this.
Toledoth.
And the rabbis talk about it here. So that's how you need to look at this section. It's not the gap theory, but the gap theory seems to have been somewhat based on this older Jewish view. It seems to have been like the fella that developed it, this guy Chalmers. He must have basically read the rabbis and developed this view of his, but what he came up with was a little different. He had an ex nihilo at the front and then a gap, and that's not quite right.